JJK's anime has always been incredible, especially season 3 so far. Very grass is green, sky is blue thing to say right at the beginning of the video, I know, but let me cook. Oh, and I should probably mention this video is completely safe for anime onlys. There's no manga spoilers here. But it will hopefully transform how you see JJK's anime for the better, in theory. The animation and direction of Jujutsu Kaisen, aka Gojo Cinema, is generally what people talk about when the anime is airing. Take this Yuji vs Higuruma episode for example, alright? The hand-to-hand sequence between Yuji and Higuruma, the fluidity of their movements, all while being easy enough to follow their exact actions, as well as the amazing choreography and incredibly strong art direction of the episode. I could go on and on and on, but I think you get my point, right? This is what comes to mind, and it's what people discuss when they watch the episode, regardless of whether they are an anime only or a manga reader. The show is simply considered one of the peaks of the industry in that respect, so naturally the quality of animation and the way MAPPA continues to raise the bar is, understandably, what gets talked about the most, right? When the manga releases, you will generally see manga readers talk about the story and the writing. When the anime releases, you will generally see people talk about the animation, regardless of how much they enjoy the story. Which is completely fine, obviously, but in reality, these two things are not mutually exclusive. Despite what Twitter or TikTok, god I hate TikTok, especially JJK TikTok, but yeah, despite what these apps might tell you, animation is not all Jujutsu Kaisen has going for it, not even close. Because after all, seasoning is only as good as the dish you put it on. Strange analogy, I know, but let me cook here for a second, alright? Please, I want my 10 seconds of pseudo-intellectual fame. The manga is the dish. The seasoning is the anime. The seasoning can bring a dish from a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, sure. But it can't bring a dish from 2 out of 10 to 9 out of 10, or even a 5 out of 10 if we're being real. The same applies to anime like Jujutsu Kaisen. Carried by animation. It's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot online when talking about anime such as JJK, Demon Slayer, and, well, pretty much any mainstream series that has above average animation. But this concept isn't even close to being as prevalent a thing as some would think. If it were true in, well, any capacity, then Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer's manga wouldn't be anywhere near as successful as they are, and I would be out of a job because no one would give a shit about me analyzing a story that is purely carried by animation. In reality, the term elevated by animation is much more fitting, and it's this right here that I think the Yuji vs Higuruma episode demonstrates better than any other episode of Jujutsu Kaisen before it. Not to say the anime hasn't elevated the source material before, because goddamn the entirety of Season 2 had me painting my room white, but Episode 9 of JJK Season 3 specifically takes this idea to a completely different level. Now, why is this the case? Simple. It is one of the best directed and well-animated episodes of the show, but it is also one of the best and most compelling things that Gege Akutami has ever written. Which I guess finally brings me to the focus of this video. How exactly did the anime elevate the already peak source material to make this episode stand above the rest? To answer that question, we're just going to have to look at both. So please remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can help me crush Orion. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So Higuruma's pretty cool, right? I think most people agree on that. And he has a pretty interesting backstory. Actually, it's kinda depressing. He's a good person with immense talent that strived to help people, but he got beaten down by the reality of the world he lives in and the ugliness of the masses until he eventually snapped and killed those he deemed responsible for the injustice in the world. And yeah, now that you're hearing it like that, you should realize it's kinda familiar. This whole Higuruma vs Yuji event in the story is simply a continuation of one of Jujutsu Kaisen's most prevalent themes. Just like Gojo and many others, Higuruma is cursed by strength, in more ways than one. He is cursed by his own natural genius and the way he naturally sees the world compared to, just being a bystander NPC, willing to accept the reality of the world like everybody else. But he also has literally been cursed by Kenjaku when Kenjaku started the culling game and granted Higuruma the ability to use a curse technique. And just like Geto, who was once also a talented sorcerer and a very pure person that was also striving to save the weak, he snapped and resorted to the extreme solution. They both turned their backs on those that they once swore to protect, which is the very essence of the cycle of curses in Jujutsu Kaisen. Higuruma's solution in that moment was to kill the prosecutor and the judge and accept the culling game as a way to brutally enforce justice, void of human corruption, which is akin to Gojo in Season 1 saying he could just go and kill off the Jujutsu higher-ups. The reason Gojo doesn't do this in that moment, though, is because he has seen firsthand that taking that route won't lead to meaningful change. They would simply be replaced by others just as bad as they were, and no one would then accept Gojo as the leader if his so-called better world was built on literal murder. His reasoning for nurturing the new generation instead of killing off the old generation is proven way more effective, because at the end of the day it was his guidance that saved characters like Yuta Okotsu from following Geto and Higuruma down the same path. And that's where Yuji comes in. Yuji Itadori is undoubtedly cursed. His trauma meter is like off the charts. Yet he resigns himself to bearing the burden of other people's suffering and strives to help others regardless. Unlike Geto and Higuruma, Yuji is unbreakable. He will not snap because he is simply a cog in the machine to exercise curses and won't stop until the cycle is broken. Already at this point in the story, we can see Yuji Itadori following in the footsteps of his mentor and being a guide that saved Higuruma from going further down that dark path before it was too late. And there is obviously like so much more to unpack from Yuji especially, but I can't really get into some of it without entering spoiler territory, and the rest I can just bring up later on when I need to. But for now, I think I've made my point pretty clear, right? Like, this section of the manga is just incredibly well written. What I love about Gege's writing, that, to be fair, not everybody does, is that he really doesn't like to hold your hand when conveying these themes. Consuming the story once or twice usually isn't enough to appreciate how deep some of this stuff can go, but what's great is that once or twice is enough to still appreciate it at face value. It works either way. But at the same time, I do feel like the reason why a lot of casual readers or casual viewers will go online and say JJK has no writing is kind of similar to Bleach in that, you know, you've got to be willing to look further and deeper. It does have some incredible writing and themes, but at face value, it's nothing, you know, ridiculous, with the exception of a few moments like this Higuruma stuff. But yeah, on the surface, these two characters have great writing anyway. And even while exploring the story of the culling games and giving us all these cool fights, Gege is like somehow simultaneously weaving the long-running themes of the story as a whole throughout these moments. Even in the manga though, I do think Yuji vs Higuruma is one of, if not the best examples of Gege's writing style. So then, anyway, the point is we have established that the dish is incredible. Now we just need to add the seasoning. Yeah, I've kind of become attached to this analogy. I don't think it's going away. Well, anyway, how does the anime actually elevate the manga, and to what extent? Well, I think we should probably start with the basics, the actual fight. I can yap about peak writing until the cows come home, but that won't change the fact that insanely awesome and hype fight scenes are just a huge part of the reason why myself and so many others love JJK. There's no denying that, there's no point even trying. When looking back on the Culling Games manga, I feel like Yuji vs Higuruma just kind of always gets love from the fans, but I never really see anybody talk about the actual combat, because the reality is that compared to some other fights in the manga, this one didn't really have anything that special. It was, you know, a few pages of left, right, good night and strong hammer. The actual combat is never really what the manga readers talked about, because that wasn't the focus of this fight. What are the anime watchers talking about after watching this episode though? Yeah, they're talking about the actual fight and the combat, which is a very good thing, and it's the perfect example of, you know, how much the anime adaptation has elevated the manga. Goshizono took those handful of combat chapters, hired one of the most cracked combat animators to ever grace the industry, and basically just said, "F it, we ball." Gosso even gave Neon 41 permission to actually change the storyboard that Gosso himself made for that fight, so that he could have proper creative freedom and truly make that fight as incredible as it turned out to be. The end result of Gosso's storyboarding and Nyan 41's breathtaking key animation was one that ultimately completely changed the way that we actually think about this fight. It's no longer seen as that really well-written fight without any memorable combat. It's now seen as that really well-written fight with one of the best and most memorable action sequences in the entire series. Where the anime may have elevated fights like Sukuna vs Mahoraga and Sukuna vs Jogo from 50 to 100 in terms of combat, Yuji vs Higuruma went from 10 to 100. That is exactly why I think this episode is like the best example of how MAPPA just insanely elevates the manga. The beautiful key animation and insanely inventive storyboard is primarily what people are talking about. As they should, because, oh my days, like never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined Higuruma using his gavel as a machine gun or riding it like a broomstick. Yuji blocking that hit and Higuruma smashing the gavel into his face anyway, actually it just lives rent-free in my head. It wasn't even that big of a thing in the episode. Like, it happened so quickly, but it was such a, like, noticeable and memorable and unique way of showing the hand-to-hand combat. Something that the anime also improved on from the manga, at least in my opinion, is how strong they made Higuruma feel. I got the impression that JJK always wanted to make it seem like Higuruma was unnaturally strong for someone without any official sorcerer training, but given how short the actual fight was in the manga, I don't think it really hit as hard as he wanted it to. But seeing Higuruma move like that in the anime and do all these dope things with his gavel made him seem way more versatile and dangerous as an opponent. To be honest, if anything, it kind of made him seem too strong, because what f***ing law school did this man go to for him to be able to move like that? I mean, everybody else that he fought until Yuji pulled up would have had their technique stripped, making them a pretty easy target, so if he's just gonna one-shot them after that point, how the hell did he even learn to fight on this level? But guess what? I don't care, it's cool as hell. Moving away from the improved action sequences though, many anime-only factors like voice acting, music, and art direction also obviously elevate the writing and just the episode as a whole. It's like I said in my initial review, yeah? The music and lighting was basically used to split the episode into 3 different parts based on the tone. JJK deliberately wrote this section of the manga to basically lure the reader into a false sense of security when Yuji is first accused of going to a pachinko parlor while being underaged, and it's kind of just meant to be unserious. Like, the stakes really don't feel that high. It sort of lowers your guard so that what Judgment says, you know, during Yuji's retrial hits literally 10 times harder. Judgment accuses Yuji Itadori of mass murder in Shibuya on October 31st. Yeah, I know, I reused that clip from my old Yuji vs Higuruma analysis video. And what? It was dope. Why would I not use it again? Anyway, the anime basically does the same thing, but uses the lighting and the music to massively enhance the effect. The first trial basically has this warm, golden spotlight on Higuruma and Yuji, which doesn't make anything feel too over-aggressive, but it still does a very good job of making Yuji look very small and intimidated compared to his environment. The courtroom itself is just way bigger than it needs to be for only 2 people, with guillotine-like structures all around in the place of walls. I mean, even Judgment seemed like way bigger and way more intimidating in the anime than the manga, which really does sell the idea that Higuruma's opponent is being judged. Still though, the character animation and Yuji shaking uncontrollably is just funny and unserious. But that changes right at the moment he receives his confiscation penalty, and we instantly cut back to the red light of the theater and the music kicks into battle mode. When battle mode is over and Yuji gets hit with the Shibuya accusation, the red light of the theater then suddenly vanishes and is replaced by this kind of colder blue and green spotlight effect focusing on Yuji and Higuruma. The rest of the room kind of goes back to being the dull grey that it was before. Not only does this massively separate it from the first part of the episode, but the switch from full red to soft blue and green colours could also show how, instead of just simply being out for blood, Higuruma is now wavering slightly because he's very unsure about why Yuji actually confessed to a crime that the evidence said was not his fault. Even the switch between the bright flashbacks back to the dull greys and soft, sad, kind of, blue and green colours creates this amazing contrast, to be honest, between him, before snapping and him after snapping and deciding all people were weak and ugly and just low-key needed to die. The drawings this episode were also just incredible. As usual for JJK, okay, that's nothing special in this episode compared to the rest, but I do really feel like, those close-up shots of Higuruma's frustrated face as he screams his new ideology at Yuji is a really good way of just showing how he's basically coping at this point, because he can't process that this 15-year-old kid standing in front of him literally defies everything he has come to believe. I mean, the almost like heavenly spotlight shining down upon Higuruma and Yuji as he goes for the final blow, as well as this, subtly hopeful la 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 music, both looks and sounds amazing. Well, yeah, no shit. But you could also interpret this a bit more literally and see it as symbolism of Higuruma's redemption. These things, like music, lighting, and even the incredible voice acting throughout this episode, are all a lot more subtle than something like, blatantly extending a fight scene that didn't really happen in the manga. But when combined together, these smaller elements do just massively elevate what JJK was trying to portray in the manga. And yeah, sure, anime almost always does just have this effect, right? This is not exclusive to this episode, and it's definitely a thing in JJK especially, but I do feel like this episode specifically really pushed that to the limit. And this is just about the overall adaptation of the episode. There are more, specific moments that I also really appreciated, such as the anime making it much clearer that Yuji was possibly about to accept his death, because that sword absolutely would have hit him if Higuruma hadn't dispelled it. It kind of reminded me of like a similar thing to when he was facing Yuta in Shibuya, right? He does seem like he's struggling and trying to get away, but it also feels like he's not doing everything he can to ensure that he lives, because mentally he's kind of having a tug of war with himself where he's going, should I really resist this? Like maybe it would be better if I just, die. And then there's how MAPPA chooses to adapt the exposition and jujutsu explanation moments, such as Tengen explaining how domains work to Yuji. In the manga, it's like a single panel that you just kind of read, right? Or I guess not read, in the case of JJK fans. But if it was just read to you bar for bar by a narrator in a generic sense, then viewers would probably lose engagement and start behaving like JJK fans, right? They would just sort of forget the information. But no, Yuji like fully peels back into the flashback, and there's this whole animation of a barrier expanding while Tengen is explaining. It's a very simple, way of doing it, but it definitely helps keep the viewer engaged in these slower, more exposition-heavy moments. Also, side note, but like, when the hell did Tengen actually say this to Yuji? Like, what memory is this? Because we saw his whole conversation with Tengen in episode 3, and I'm pretty sure they just got straight to work after that, right? And even if they did find time to talk again, like, what was the context? Why was Tengen just yapping to him about what domains were like back in the Heian era? Anyway, the final thing that I noticed about this episode, which might just be a, natural difference between anime and manga, rather than MAPPA doing anything particularly special, is that the smaller nuances of Gege's power systems are much more noticeable in the anime than the manga. Yuji recognizes that a technique as strong as Higuruma's must surely have a weakness or limitation, which is how he figures out the retrial rule. I noticed it in the episode where he fought Haba and pointed out that Haba likely becomes less and less durable the lower, down his body you go. Trade-offs are supposedly a common rule in Jujutsu, so I do appreciate these moments that subtly acknowledge the nuances in the power system. Again, this is less so something special MAPPA did, more so just a result of me finding it easier to notice these things happening in the anime as opposed to the manga. But yeah, you guys know me, I could probably sit here and ramble on about this episode for way longer than I need to, but there's no point. I feel like I've touched on everything that I need to touch on. I think I definitely got my point across. This episode of Jujutsu Kaisen took an already amazing part of the source material and just made it way, way better. So I guess my conclusions are: carried by animation is a myth. Jujutsu Kaisen does have great writing, it's just not necessarily in a format that everybody enjoys or wants for their story, which to be honest is completely valid. It's just personal preference at that point. And most importantly, episode 9 of JJK season 3 is one of, if not the best adaptation and elevation of the manga that MAPPA has achieved so far. It is so good. I think my signing off note for this video is just gonna be that I find it so cool how, like, before the episode came out, Yuji vs Higuruma was never considered in conversations about best combat in JJK. And yet, overnight, it's somehow become, a literal top 3 hand-to-hand fight in the entire show so far. That, to me, is just, it's so cool, and it really highlights how good the MAPPA staff are at adapting this series. But yeah, as always, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, the link to my full deep dive analysis of Yuji vs Higuruma will be on the end card and linked in the description below if you want to check that out, which I do highly recommend because I think it is one of my better works. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.